I could not be more excited to pull this together and to have Russell to my left. I'm super excited about moderating this fireside chat. I'm going to do just a super quick introduction of Russell. He's the head of emerging technologies at Temasek, focused on investing globally in deep tech ventures grounded in STEM innovation. And prior to joining in 2020, he was the president of new enterprises and ventures at ST Engineering. He has over 2 decades of experience building and scaling new markets for applied materials. As you might know, it's a Silicon Valley headquartered technology multinational company where he was president, Applied Materials Southeast Asia, and concurrently held global corporate level business development responsibilities for new markets. Russell led the regional business where he oversaw the company's infrastructure expansion into manufacturing, supply chain, R&D, and product development for global markets, and as well as the chairman of Infocom Media Development Authority, IMDA. And like me, but from years ago, he has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, so I'm a recovered engineer. So I'm excited about that. Well, welcome, Russell. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Why don't we start with the first question? I'm going to turn this over this way a little bit. Maybe tell us a little bit more about your role at Temasek and your group, and specifically what are the goals and focus areas for your team at Temasek?
Yeah, first, thank you for inviting me again. Maybe I should start off with a bit of a story how I ran into TDK and TDK Ventures. This was back in 2021, sometime, I think, first half of the year. We met Nicholas in an Italian restaurant in Sunnyvale with a few of your other colleagues. And out of that dinner, I recall, wow, this team is quite amazing and is being formed, and it's set up within a Japanese technology company. Very impressed, and I told my team, let's work with TDK Ventures. That was about 2.5 years ago. I think you guys have gone from strength to strength. And I also want to congratulate TDK. I think I saw something in Financial Times yesterday around solid state battery yesterday. Well done, thank you. Yeah. So, okay, coming back to what I do at Temasek. So Temasek, if you're not familiar, it's owned by the Singapore government. As of last year, we had an asset base of close to 400 billion Singapore dollars. We'll announce our financial results in a couple of weeks. We have been a very prolific early stage investors for many years. We started in life science, food tech, fintech, etc., e-commerce, as you can see. We were one of the early investors in Alibaba back then. So there's one area that I think Temasek was maybe somewhat reticent, held back a bit. And this is the area of deep tech physical science. And 3-4 years ago, we decided maybe this is the time to lean in on this space. And hence, this group was set up, Emerging Tech. We invest in 4 broad areas, but 2 primary focus, obviously climate tech, compute and cognition, disruptive materials. And if you can't fit those 3, then we call it frontier tech. Yeah. But physical science, deep tech, my definition of deep tech is your value creation is anchored by STEM innovation, by which you have to invest regularly in R&D. We invest across 3 modalities. 1, obviously, directly in startups. 2, in funds of funds. 3, we also do joint ventures with large companies if they want to carve out. Example, if TDK want to carve out a new business division that fits the attributes that we think is a deep tech, happy to have a discussion. For the funds, we are quite targeted. We like to invest in funds that are capable of venture building, especially if they are well located in global innovation hotspots. So we do that too. Then deep tech startups, we go in anywhere between C and Series C, thereabouts. And beyond that, other parts of Temasek can carry on or doesn't matter for us. So but that's the starting point. That's the entry point for us. So within this construct, we also have a platform called Zora. I think Henry talked about it, alluded to it indirectly just now. So this is a separate team. I think one of my fellow Zora colleagues are here, Dixon. We allocate capital to this group to do venture building out of Singapore and loosely in the region. To Henry's earlier point, we have a fairly vibrant research ecosystem here by which we think we can tap on. And PSN was one of the first ones we venture built under this construct. This construct also allows us to invest globally to create the connection. So both the team I head, Emerging Tech and Zora, operating in tandem by and large, and we operate just that the team inside Temasek doesn't venture build per se, because in a large entities, different processes, so we've set up a separate team that has a lot more agility in how they want to do stuff. So these are the two constructs we have: total asset, or let's say total approved investments to date after 3.5 years, plus some internal reaggregation, about north of $1 billion so far, across maybe close to 30 assets, startups, a handful of funds, and then 1 or 2 platforms. Yeah, so that's the team. Between the two teams, let's say low 20s in terms of headcount. Yeah. So that's the team.
That's the team. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful background. And if we kind of switch to your role as the chairman of IMDA, maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you're driving there, some of the key initiatives and projects that you've been excited and focused on there.
For attendees who come from overseas, this is a government agency that oversees the digital and media space. I use space for a particular reason. They have quite a bit of function. One is regulation. Second is industry and ecosystem development. 3 is workforce development in the context of digital and media. Third, and the 4th is, it has a social mandate also, how to drive social inclusion in the era of digitization, loosely speaking. So it's regulate, promote across 4 functions in 2 broad industries. So that's the agency, about 1,300 people, I think. Insofar as what it entails when you think about this agency, that's one way of describing it, at least from my perspective. How you look at an agency is a function of the environment it's operating in. And safe to say, this government agency is contending with an external environment that has the highest rate of change. The main topic here today, AI. AI is evolving so fast. So that is the setting by which this agency is tasked to operate. What is it focused on? Besides regulating functions, which I will spend a bit less time on, it is obviously very keen in ensuring Singapore is well positioned for the digital AI era, not only in terms of industry promotion, ecosystem development, inclusion of the workforce, but also ensuring there's sufficient governance around AI. I think this has been a topic that is broadly socialized around globally and locally. The position we take there is really, because Singapore is a trusted environment by and large, how do you leverage the trust for innovation versus regulating in a very traditional sense? So that's one area of great focus for the agency to enable that environment and at the same time connect globally. That's one. Because digital, and there are a lot of emerging technologies in the digital realm or sub-technology strains emerging, how does it pre-position itself well so that when the opportunities arises from a policy standpoint, from an industry development standpoint, you can stay ahead of the curve. So that's also a key focus. Because of my role in Temasek, I do spend a bit more time around the AI space, around the quantum space, around robotics, and starting to look at things like agentic environment, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole slew of stuff, which I think through the next 2 days we'll talk about it, is of keen focus. Maybe the third area of priority for me is how do you support an organization that has to operate in a very fast-changing environment? Typically, we think of organizations, you have to match the organization ability to learn, evolve, and adapt to the external environment, by which if you can't keep pace, you will lose relevance. I mean, a good example is if you're a cybersecurity firm and you're learning slower than the external threat environment, in no order, you're shut down. Recently, we announced a preliminary governance framework around generative AI, and it's a work in progress. And announce a more conducive environment for the data centers. But Singapore is still energy constrained, so it's not an easy problem to solve. So many stuff going on there, but it's exciting. I find it quite an interesting challenge.
Terrific, yeah. And if I can just do maybe just one click down and combining the sort of the hat of the startup world and how things move faster. Tell us more how you maybe apply some of that in the agency world, or the IMDA, and how does that help you there?
Yes, I think obviously there are two very separate entities, and my roles are separated. Now, without violating any confidentiality on both entities, what can be, from insights perspective, connectivity perspective, create a bit of intersection to make sure each learn from each other. So if we have invested in a company that we think is very compelling and is demonstrating good progress and is related to IMDA's mandate, then why not make the introduction? And typically as an investor with the level of diligence we do on an entity, we would generally have a lot more perspective as to the trajectory of the startup or company we invested in, the potential it's capable of. And then as an outsider or government agency, you just can't see that to that depth. So without breaching any confidentialities, we sometimes bring the two together and see what they can do. So that's what area we do. Inside emerging technology, while I say I'm investing, we spend disproportionate amount of time looking 1, 2, 3, 4 years out before it's investable, to understand what the technical signposts the team needs to pay attention to. And when the technical signposts are likely to be resolved through innovative companies, that's when we choose to deploy capital. So disproportionate times looking as far upstream as possible. The insights are not confidential per se. So I occasionally tell them, look, you got to think about agentic environment is coming. These are the few things we need to watch for. What do you think about? How do you think about analyzing robotic foundation models? What do you watch for, etc.? So things like that. Dialogues we have, and for me, I had to use the quantum computing example because I've got multiple states in my head. Sometimes I figure out which state I'm in. Temasek or IMDA, or both are combined or both are separated. so you just have to operate in that mode. But I think if you do it right, there's a lot of interesting outcomes you can drive. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, let me build on that and talk about, ask a question about the kind of ecosystem. So this is the next set of questions I prepared is, building that, participating and your point of view on the ecosystem, and what are the essential components, and how do you make sure that that's strong and can really help advance that moving forward?
Okay, let's talk about what the benchmark is first. I think by and large still the US innovation ecosystem is by far the most innovative one. And I think a lot have been discussed around how other jurisdictions, other locations can replicate it. And in many ways, it's very difficult to replicate, right? So the US setting has grown in a way that is uniquely synergistic, and the flywheel is there. Now, if you can't replicate that, how should you think about it in areas that you don't have all the attributes, like in the Silicon Valley? So I think about it in 3 categories of capital, and not all are literally financial, obviously. So the human capital piece, the financial capital piece, and the policy and systems capital. So 3 buckets, and you try and drive an intersection of all these 3. So from a human capital standpoint, you got to unpack what do you really need? What kind of talent archetypes that are necessary in an ecosystem that is very vibrant? Obviously, you need good research scientists, obviously with some that have an entrepreneurial bent. You need good people who know how to think about R&D in the context of commercializing it. In Silicon Valley parlance is product development. You need venture builders that knows how to work with the research ecosystem to form a team. And then you need good venture investors who understand deep tech. Deep tech has its own attributes. In this case, bulk of the stuff we are discussing here have that attribute. So there's a host of talent archetypes you need to go and see. Are they there? If not there, how do you fill the gap? On the financial capital side, I think most of us are familiar. How do you have sufficient funding for the right type of research that you think has commercial potential in the long run? So that kind of capital, and most likely a public capital. Sometimes it's private capital. Then as the investors, the equity guys kick in, the guys who are venture building seed have a different risk profile than people at the later stage. So you need that typical equity capital stack players around there. And by the time you scale up, typically the guys who play as seed won't participate anymore. And along that whole growth scale-up journey, how do you create enough non-dilutive capital to assist that commercialization phases? Because loosely deep tech, you need fairly the use of patient capital. I find that word sometimes too passive. Actually, you need capital with stamina that can go with the journey, right? So that whole stack must be there. And again, if you look at your ecosystem, what are the missing pieces? You go fill the gap as a policy planner. Then from the policies and system perspective, you have certain levers, right? How do you direct funding? How do you create a talent policy that brings in the right people if you think these categories are missing? How do you bring the type of investors that fill up the capital journey you need to embark on? IP frameworks are critical. If discussing with the university or the research institutes, how do you have it relatively investor friendly so that private capital can come in? Now, all that you orchestrate. Yeah, that's not technically my role, but I think that's how I look at it, and I participate in this in the Singapore ecosystem. So despite its size, I think it's relatively vibrant. Still one or two missing pieces. As always, no system is perfect. So that's how I think I look at it from my perspective. Now, Zora is designed partly to also operate in this system. And through that vehicle, we can ascertain where are the gaps. And given who we are, we obviously have dialogues with the government to say, maybe this is area you could do a bit better. For those who are familiar, EDB, maybe we bring in the deep tech venture builders, etc., or even the likes of B Capital here. So forming this whole thing. Now, how should it look like, right? From my perspective, if you look at a new venture build or seed play, right IP, right research, right product development, right capital stack, by which I mean you have global investors on a cap table. And then finally you ask, where is it? Oh, it's in Singapore. Then it checks, right? And I said it's a journey for all deep tech startups because we are Temasek. We have the capacity to go in at much later stages and continue the whole journey. So that was the original conceptual design we had, and we've laid out here in this context. It's going to be a journey. It's not going to flip on a switch overnight. So that's how at least some of us think about it.
Okay, no, I like that framework very much. That's very, very helpful way to kind of break the big challenge into
unpack it into smaller pieces.
Yeah, of course.
We're all engineers trained, so you're trying to dissect all the pieces and then fuse it together.
That's right. And if I can build on that, what would be some of the things that are key learnings, best practices, and how you make that go forward in a sustained and a kind of thriving way?
Okay, I came from a business operating technology environment, newer to investing. Now, with having said that, investing early stage is not for the faint-hearted, right? I think as you can tell, immediately after the COVID, or during the COVID period, there was a huge surge in interest because everybody thought we'll go back to the good old times, capital would be free, the cost of capital will return to zero, etc. So there's a huge surge of capital. I've gone into the space. So one of the key lessons learned is be cognizant of the ebbs and flow of the industry, especially in the venture deep tech space, venture investing space. There is a certain rhythm to it. Be very mindful of it. That's one. So the long story short, that don't get caught up in FOMO, fear of missing out. Easier said than done, I can tell you. Two, there are a lot of lessons learned from failure, obviously. And if your organization is not tuned to learn from mistakes, then I think it's a waste. And I think for all venture, early stage investing, there's a significant failure rate. How do you manage that failure rate to the lowest possible cost to your organization? Right? So how do you do portfolio construction? How do you allocate through the various stages, etc.? How do you assign enough capital to take out certain binary risks before you write a bigger check? Third one is about people. I mean, frankly, coming from a technology world, large setting, a lot of talent, and I think this is maybe it's representative of large companies. You under-index the talent needed to do stuff because large companies have a large talent pool, over-index the technology. So how do you find and actually it's a bit of an inversion in smaller entities, right? Talent can pull through a B- technology, but weak talent cannot pull through an A- technology in terms of bringing it to market, right? So some of this stuff need to be careful. Then if you're an investor, portfolio construction, how you parcel out the risks to your entire capital you can deploy, super critical. As much as you like something and you think it's going to be the next best thing since sliced bread, you got to exercise some restraint. So I've seen rounds that are 7 rounds of very, very, very good stuff and still trip over. Right? Every round is a markup, it looks on the right. Round 7, it was almost existential round. I've seen it before, so some of this stuff just had to be watchful of. Yeah.
Excellent insights. And actually, this is also an excellent link because we will be having a conversation later this afternoon focused on human capital and how generative AI can be applied there. Before I go to my next question, I want to sort of prep the room because this is a treat to be, first of all, to be sitting next to Russell doing this, but we will have a chance for Q&A. So be thinking of a couple of good questions to pose. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. I'm going to move to the sort of the theme that we're here for as a DX week this year. And that's what generative AI and the sea change that's representing as far as a paradigm shift. So in light of that rapidly changing environment, how should we be thinking about how we're operating, investors, founders, maybe corporates that are here? Tell us some of your thoughts there.
Around generative AI.
Generative AI and the changes that are bringing.
Okay, this is the biggest topic, I think. This is probably the biggest topic we'll talk about for a long time. And I'm talking long time as in maybe years to come. Let me start off by phrasing this. I know we use this is the 4th industrial revolution, but I would posit as this is the 2nd cognitive revolution. And why I use second, you got to go back in time, right? If you think back, which technology has clear augmentation to your thinking powers? Clear line of sight augmentation to your ability to think, right? At least you have to go back very long in history. When we were early humans, our brains were not that big. And at some point when we discovered fire and used fire to cook, your diet change. And that was, if you read conventional wisdom, and it allow your brain to grow bigger. And to me, that fire, one of the most consequential implications, allows you to eat better and nourish the brain better, and you got smarter through interaction. Now, if you think between now and generative AI, look at all the technology stacks that came through history. Actually, you can't see something close to that. So I would almost posit this time the generative AI, if it plays out to its full potential, like many of us speculate or think genuinely it would, it directly augments our ability to think. And if it surpasses a certain point, you get general artificial intelligence. So to me, that's the second cognitive revolution. Now, how do we attempt to think about it? I don't have all the answers. First, one thing is attempt to understand the technical entitlement of the AI models. By that, can the transformer architecture scale? And there's this thing now we discuss around scaling laws, and if it gets bigger and bigger, it gets better and better. So the concept of making sure you have sufficient level of ability to unpack the architectures of all the models, I think is an important factor in thinking through AI. If you look at, then understand other emerging models that are not fundamentally transformer in nature. So I think that's also an important thing to get at least a sense of happening. I think there are space-based models that are not quadratic in terms of calculation. I think Vinod Khosla talks about symbolic, I can't remember, he used some term of mathematics that allows you to be more deterministic kind of models. So there are all these branches. I think having an ability to have a feel what's going on there is also one. So think of it as a cognitive revolution. Think of it as how you try to understand the entitlement of each architectural model, I think is important. Third thing I would put on the table, then I'll get to your answer. I think I use a technique, and I think others can use it too, but this is how I help myself think about it. Because a lot of people talk about AI in one big lump. Oh, we've been doing AI since this, we've been doing AI since 80s neural network. I think the right way to ask yourself, to try and tease out what has changed, is really just draw a line. What is before generative AI, just call it AI 1.0. What comes preceding it, AI 2.0. Why? You're forced to distinguish the difference between the two. Right? So this is a technique not necessarily just for AI, but I think when you're dealing with disruptive technology, that framework is, I think, quite useful. Now, in this case, what has changed, right? Generative AI, maybe loosely 5 vectors. One is it's a bimodal translation function. Language to something and back. So English language to coding. Mandarin to legal outputs. And it goes back and forth. Now, if you go back in time, just go back to version 1, this doesn't work that well, right? So the utility of one model that can span across this bidirectional translation function is very high, and much better than what came before that. Second dimension is you can now do multimodal sense making. You can look at text, image, and a series of image, a video, verbal commands, all fuse it together with some sense-making capability. Initially, it was a mixture of expert models that fuse this together. Then you see 4 Omni, natively multimodal. You can do it sense-making straight. Now, you go back in time, pre-generative AI, not possible. It's typically single modal, right? And it's very complicated to fuse together, very brittle. Third, okay, this is why it's named generative AI. In the past, you look at past predictions to create future patterns. Or you look at past patterns to create predictions based on a pattern. This current technology allows you to create all kinds of stuff. Video generation is classic, right? The diffusion models allow you to do that. So that in itself is unique, doesn't exist. Fourth is, in the past, you train on a certain use case and you drift away from the use case, it's going to fumble. Today, that distance for you to drift to dissimilar use case is much higher. And in many ways, describing human thinking too, right? So approaching zero-shot learning. So that's a clear distinction. Now, last one is philosophical. We can always say there's emerging better and better reasoning capabilities in many ways. And then you said, okay, are you sure his reasoning is quite philosophical? But actually, I always counterpose. Do you know how the human brain reasons? It's also not so apparent. We, in our own ways, are quasi-black box, other than seeing our synapses flashing around. Now, you see, all this exists in the past. It doesn't really exist in the past. Now, then from there, actually, you can start thinking what happens, right? Example, go think about if some of this capability exists in the field of robotics, for example. And that's why there's so much interest in robotics now. You can unlock many stuff, right? Now, it's not perfect, but you have a step function change towards, if you read Isaac Asimov's books on robotics, it's one step closer to a huge step function jump. Now, you can go through the whole thing, right? People talk about agentic environment. These are all the foundation pieces. I think, in fact, Stanford, thanks to my colleague here, was just reading out some stuff to us on a paper published recently, Octopus 1, 2, 3, 4. And they're all thinking about foundational pieces to create an agentic environment to simplify interaction among agents. Right? So these are all coming. And so coming back to the framework, 1.0, 2.0 doesn't necessarily need to be generative. I think it's just a technique I use, and I think sometimes helpful to make the discussion richer. Now, next stage, now how do you pass all this out? If I break it, consumer or enterprise, industry, and science. And you go and pass it. Consumer, possible, because sometimes consumers are not so exacting in their requirements, and how you constrain it. I mean, great example is Apple's future product launch, Apple Intelligence. You can see how you can use. In fact, all of us are using it to some extent. A lot of junior research analysts will use 3 frontier models, 4 Omni, Gemini, the latest version, and 1 more, then push through a set of prompts for market research work, and come up with some logic. And they'll see how much convergence, just in case one comes up with a totally strange answer. So that is happening. The industry enterprise is a bit tougher, except for the creative industries, because you're fundamental to generate a lot of value. You need to stitch together multiple pieces of AI workloads, by which the Gen AI models are still probabilistic. You stitch probabilistic plus probabilistic plus probabilistic without checking. You can compound the error. So I think that holds it back a bit. Let's see how it goes. Now, science, I think you've read a lot of stuff. A variety of people publish around material science discovery, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's also a very interesting field. To my own learnings, I realize it's very early days. Notwithstanding, Google published something quite interesting. But there were a lot of papers that are coming out now to question Google's quality of, I can't remember the name of the paper, but it's A-Lab stuff with Berkeley. I wish one thing I took away when we think about science, generative AI in isolation without deep domain expertise at the cross point of intersection, I think could lead to maybe excessive hype, right? So the science piece will come along, but please marry it with a lot of domain depth to make sure you're counter-checking. Then the last piece is governance, which I think may be out of topic today, at least given how broad this topic is. Then I think the last piece is, as much as the technology is ready, society ready, right? So that's another track of discussion. So some thoughts around this topic is very vast, yeah.
No, these are terrific insights, and some definitely, I'm hearing some definite key takeaways that are new and unique. We're getting kind of close to the time, so maybe if there are any, we have a couple people that are running with mics to help the audience. Are there any questions from the audience that we want to pose to Russell? If you can, yes, pass her the mic, please, and then if you can announce who you are and before you ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tina. I'm co-founder and CEO of a Gen AI company called Adley AI. We are part of the IMDA Gen AI sandbox. My question is about agentic workflow that you mentioned, and for companies who are building, so applied AI as now we are called. We want. What is your sense of when you are having conversations? What will it look like, and how do you think that's coming in on the enterprise side, and how are people likely to see it applied?
Okay. First, it's also a question I ask myself. That's the way of saying I don't have a distinctive, clear-cut answer. But coming back to usual frameworks which we want to apply when we think through things that are so fluid, right? And I think step one, being an engineer, is got to go through this this exercise of describing what it takes for an agent to talk to an agent. Talk as in more than just talk, I mean figuratively talk.
Interact.
How they interact with each other, what are the pieces of technology that needs to be in play. I think that would be one area by which one needs to understand. Two, I think I'm thinking at a much broader level. If it happens, what really happens? To example, how much compute we need in the infrastructure stack. What is done on the edge versus what is done in the cloud. The third is how do you deal with architectures that are fundamentally probabilistic, even though you got many techniques to make it more deterministic. So I think the example of a signpost in this construct is you cannot have probabilistic engagement at the agent level anymore if you want to have agent to agent en masse, because the propagation of errors could be unimaginable, right? So I think that's also a thing you want to think about. And the fourth is obvious, if you're in a startup, got to find the use case by which the adoption is less daunting. What does the use case look like? How can you sandbox agentic environment by which you can draw insights from? Would be things I think about. But I personally think this would be coming. Yes, this will be coming. How, when, exactly how, very hard to be very prescriptive as you look further upstream. But the conceptual potential of all the building blocks, you can almost extrapolate, would lend ourselves to the environment. I think that's the time even the AI governance framework would be even more important. Yeah. So I don't have a specific answer per se, but got to go upstream and unpack.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. We probably have, I'm just watching the clock here. We probably have time for one more audience question.
Hi. Thanks, Russell, for your talk. My name is Himanshu. I am co-founder of Origa. So we are building voice AI for human-like conversations that have multiple use cases in recruitment, re-engagement, etc. You mentioned a bit about Bay Area, and I wanted to ask you, what are the differences you see in terms of the AI startup ecosystem in Bay Area versus, let's say, in Southeast Asia? And what are some of the advantages or opportunities that we have as local AI startups in comparison to our Bay Area counterparts? Because a lot of energy and excitement is happening there in comparison to here. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I think in many ways, Silicon Valley is, I mean, I presume you spend time there. It's obviously, everybody talks about AI day in, day out to a large extent, and the infrastructure needed to power AI. Obviously very vibrant, a lot of talent, a lot of capital flowing into this whole space. Having said that, I think there's a view that the initial wave of capital going into AI is not accelerating anymore, but still a lot of money going in there. The ability to attract talent into Silicon Valley for AI startups is still in the category of what intense talent for war going on out there. People are hiring left and right from each other. The third thing I think would be a bit of a caution. Whatever you're building, don't end up being what they call roadkill by the next large language model iteration, right? So this is a hazard of building AI applications. You're building on top of a capability, which is fundamentally a LLM model. And if the next iteration is a quantum leap up, then where does it leave your particular application or the stuff you're attempting to build, right? So when Sora came out, a lot of text-to-video stuff got killed. So that's one major hazard. And to be fair, they think about it very hard, how to avoid, but it's still not an easy thing. The war for talent there is intense, so you see just, the way they hire people there are very interesting. Third, coming back to my earlier point, there's a lot of money going in, but the rate of rise, I think, has moderated somewhat, in my own view, at this point I see. Vinod made a very interesting comment. I just heard it over the weekend. I have to listen to him because I'm on a panel with him next week. He said, don't worry about the cost of generating your token. The rate of improvement is so fast, so your cost per token will come down. And one of the interesting things, your compute cost is funded by very, 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 very rich companies, right? The hyperscalers generate tons of cash. They have very deep pockets. They are going out for market share, etc., etc. So look, don't worry. Oh, this is Vinod. I tend to think it's true, but he tends to be very black and white. So you said, don't worry about cost of compute. It will come down. So that's one other thing I took away. Yeah. So that's a bit some of my thoughts around it. I look at the infrastructure side, a bit slightly different dynamics, right? Can you take on NVIDIA? And if you're a startup, you've got to think through how you take on NVIDIA or the likes of NVIDIA. Yeah. Maybe if that's the last question, I just wanted to add one more point.
I have
one more.
Kind of
okay.
final question. Yeah, I have a final question. Just
okay.
kind of zoom back out and say you're known as a techno-optimist. And so how do we propose the balance between this optimism, techno-optimism, with being a realist, especially given everything that we've talked about and how fast things are moving and advancing?
Okay, first, technology has helped humanity progress a lot. Through going back in history, very obvious, right? Second statement, technology is always a double-edged sword. A knife you can use to cook, you can use to injure yourself. So just have to remember that. Third will be a very interesting thing I was reading the other day. And you reflect on it, it's actually quite true. With every rapid advancement in society comes a reactionary force that pushes it back. And there are numerous examples by which in history, when there's rapid progress through technology, the disenfranchised segments of society, the dislocated segments of society will trigger a pushback. Now, I say that because I think we have to contend with that in the age of AI. And some of these pushbacks can be very disruptive to the present societal structures, political order, etc., etc. So if you think of generative AI in that context, if how wide-ranging it can be, how game-changing it can be, I think as a society we need to think about this carefully. As we progress the technology, how do you deal with the anticipated backlash from various segments that are dislocated, right? So that's one area I think we need to watch for. So fundamentally, I think we need to progress it. How you govern AI, lots of discussion among various governments, how to contain this in the event that it's used for the wrong purposes. Now, easier said than done, frankly speaking, but just be bear in mind. I fundamentally believe we need it, but just govern it properly and be clear about the risk that comes with it.
Terrific. Did you have any final thoughts, or I think we're close to time anyhow.
No, I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
I was going to comment more on how societies should deal with technology, but I think it's okay.
If you want to just, we all want to hear. I mean, I'm fascinated listening.
So I overly compress it because of lack of time. Okay, I think let me step back today and say, what is society going through today, where you don't recognize your politics in the context of left, right, etc. We are entering a period by which a period of hyper-globalization, a period of rapid technology progression, yet you see such amount of instability within our global system, right? The globalization is kind of reversing course, the fragmentation is occurring, politics has evolved to a point where it used to be tied to economics, but in the Western realm, it's less tied to economics, it's tied to identity, reconfiguration of who you believe you are. The traditional notion of liberal democracies around it's about my individual pursuit of happiness, liberty, and self-actualization is also being challenged, right? The way we should now think about it as we think through generative AI in the context of social political changes is how are we organizing ourselves in the next 10, 15 years when this technology change is occurring. It's a topic I think will come very, very prevalent in the next 3, 4, 5 years. I think all of you here involved in technology shouldn't be devoid or shouldn't be unaware of all these changes that are occurring in society. So I think that's something, I leave it for you to just mull over in the back of your head, because when we reorganize ourselves as society, it is very, very drastic. And I think generative AI is one of the vectors that could shape how we are reorganized as society. Yeah. So I just want to leave you that thought. There's a much deeper discussion somewhere in some other forum, but I thought it was important enough to worry about this topic. Worry as in, please think about it while you pursue your technology goals.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for all your thoughts today. Please, thank you.